My name is Evelyn Carter. I was a radio copywriter in New York City, 1942. That's what my papers said. That's what my mother told her bridge club. That's what the neighbors believed when they saw me leaving the apartment in a plain wool coat, hair pinned tight, lipstick like a promise. But my real role, was to write voices that did not exist and to make them sound true. Because during the war, truth didn't always win by being loud. Sometimes it won by being convincing. If you're listening to this now, I want you to understand something before the story starts moving too fast to catch your breath. I did not carry a rifle. I did not fly a bomber. I never stormed a beach. I sat in a room that smelled like hot dust and wiring, and I helped shape what America believed at night. And one night, a voice came through my headphones that wasn't supposed to exist. It said my name. Not Miss Carter, not Evelyn, not ma'am. It said it like someone who had known me before the war, before ration books and blackouts, and the long, thin fear that lived between sirens. It said, Ev. And the studio lights didn't flicker, and the engineer didn't look up, and the clock kept its calm little circle. But my skin went cold anyway, because only one person called me that. And he was dead. His name was Tom Hale. I'll tell you who he was, because you need to know the weight of that name. Tom was a Coast Guard rescue swimmer before the papers made them heroes. He was broad-shouldered, laughed too loud, and the kind of brave that looks like recklessness until you realize it's just refusal. Refusal to leave a man behind. Refusal to let the ocean decide. He was also the first person I loved. He left for training on a rainy morning in early 42, kissed my forehead like it was something he could come back and claim, and promised he'd write. He wrote twice. The third letter was a Western Union telegram. Regret to inform you. My mother cried. I did not. I read it again and again until the words stopped being words and became a pattern, like wallpaper, like a lie someone else had decorated the room with. Then I went back to work. Because in war, grief doesn't stop the clock. It just changes the sound it makes. My job was at a radio network, one of those big buildings where men in suits walked quickly, always holding paper like it was more important than breath. We made programs for families, for soldiers, for factory workers on night shift. We sold soap and cigarettes and war bonds. We made victory sound like it was already on its way. I wrote speeches for announcers who could make "good evening" feel like a warm hand on your shoulder. And I learned the first rule of wartime radio. People don't listen for facts. They listen for feelings. They listen to be held. In spring of 1942, America needed to be held. Ships were being hit off our coast, not in some far-off ocean, off our coast. Men went to sea and didn't come back, and the newspapers didn't print every detail because there were rules, and there was fear, and there were eyes everywhere. Rumors traveled faster than trains. Some nights you could stand on the Brooklyn waterfront and smell the oil, or swear you could. People swore a lot of things then. That's when the government leaned heavier into radio. Our network got advisors. That's what they called them. Men who smiled politely and asked very specific questions about scripts. Men who didn't introduce themselves with first names. Men who watched your hands when you poured coffee like they were counting tremors. One of them arrived on a Monday, and by Tuesday he knew everyone's habits. His name was Miles Arden. I'll tell you who he was, because he matters. Miles wasn't military. He wore civilian clothes too neatly, like he ironed even his caution. He had a thin face, dark hair, and eyes that didn't blink often. When he spoke, it was gentle, almost kind, but it never wandered. He was the kind of man who could ask, "How are you?" and make it sound like an interrogation. He shook my hand and said, "Miss Carter, I've read your copy, you understand tone. I said, thank you. He said, tone is how wars are won. Then he smiled like we were sharing a secret. That week, our building went through security improvements. A locked door here, a new sign there, a reminder that loose talk could cost lives, printed in bold, taped by the elevators. At home, we taped our windows for air raid drills and learned how to turn our lights out fast. In the street, people stood in lines for sugar and tried to make jokes about it. And me. I started getting phone calls with no one on the other end. I'd answer, hello, and hear nothing except once a faint clicking, like a nail tapping glass, like something trying to speak in code but not sure I'd understand. I told myself it was crossed lines. I told myself not to be dramatic. Then the first strange thing happened on air. We were in Studio B, doing a live broadcast of a variety hour. The host was a charming man named Leonard Crane. Perfect voice, perfect hair, perfect timing. He could make a punchline land like a feather. I was behind the glass with the engineer, holding my script. Miles Arden sat in the back of the control room, quiet as furniture. The show rolled, music swelled. Laughter came from the studio audience like it had been bottled and poured. Then, during a transition, just a little breath between segments, Leonard leaned into the microphone and said a line that wasn't on my page. Not an ad-lib, not a mistake. He said, very softly, almost as if he didn't mean to, Ev, I'm not dead. My pen fell out of my hand. The engineer frowned, checked a dial. Miles Arden sat forward. Leonard continued, still smiling, still smooth, as if he'd just said the weather. Keep your voice steady, they're listening. The audience laughed because they thought it was a joke, a bit radio magic. I didn't laugh. My heart didn't know how. I stared at Leonard through the glass. He never looked at me. He never gave any sign he knew what he'd done. And then the show moved on, and the moment was gone, swallowed by music. Afterward, I confronted Leonard in the hall, my hands shaking. What did you say on air? I demanded. He blinked, genuinely confused. What do you mean? You said my name. I didn't. You did. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Evelyn, I swear, I followed the script, ask anyone. I did. The recording, when we listened later, didn't have it. It was clean, perfect. My skin prickled. That's impossible. Miles Arden stood in the corner of the room as we replayed the tape. He watched my face, not the speaker. When it ended, he said, Sometimes, Miss Carter, we hear what we expect to hear. I snapped. I did not expect to hear my dead fiancé speak to me through a radio host. Miles's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed by a fraction. Fiancé, he repeated softly, as if tasting the word. I realized I'd told him something I hadn't meant to. Then he said, Be careful, grief can be exploited. That night, I walked home in a city that had learned how to dim itself. Streetlights were hooded for blackout practice. Windows were dark. The air smelled of coal and damp stone. And for the first time since Tom's telegram, I was afraid in a way that wasn't general. Not fear of the war. Fear that the war had found me personally. In my apartment, I poured water and didn't drink it. I sat in a chair and listened to my own building settle, pipes ticking, neighbors moving, a radio somewhere playing quietly like a lullaby for adults. At 11:17, the phone rang. I stared at it. It rang again. I answered. Hello. Breathing. Then a voice. A man's voice, low and rough, with the faint sound of wind behind it. Ev. My throat closed. Tom, I whispered before I could stop myself. Don't say my name, the voice said. Listen, they're using your station. My fingers dug into the receiver. Where are you? What is this? The voice hesitated, like it was choosing which truths were safe. I'm in the water, it said. A pause. Not all the way, not yet. Then it said something that made my stomach drop through the floor. Miles Arden is not who he says he is. The line clicked. Dead. I sat there with the receiver pressed to my ear long after the dial tone began, as if holding it hard enough could pull him back through the wire. The next day, I went to work with my face arranged into something normal. Normal was a costume women wore then. We put it on like stockings. In the elevator, a man in a fedora said, "Morning," and I answered, "Morning," and neither of us meant anything except, "We're still here." At my desk, a memo waited. New segment requested, effective immediately. Subject, coastal vigilance. Tone, reassuring, call to action, report suspicious activity. Signed, M. Arden. A new segment, a propaganda piece, a neighborhood watch wrapped in patriotism. I could write it in my sleep. But my hand wouldn't move. Because they're using your station. Using it for what? And then I remembered the clicking on the phone line. Code. Intercepts. The war wasn't only on beaches and in skis. It was in wires, in signals, in what people heard and what they didn't. I did something reckless. I went downstairs to the mailroom and asked old Mr. Petrie, our building's mail clerk, for the outgoing logs. I told him it was for a segment about letters to soldiers. He adored anything that made him feel useful. While he talked, I watched. There were envelopes going out from our building, not just to sponsors and affiliates, but to addresses that didn't match anything we did. Small towns, private boxes, random names. And there was a pattern. Every Tuesday and Friday, like a heartbeat. I took note of one return address, Arden Consulting. It wasn't our network. It wasn't a sponsor. It was a mask. I folded the information into my pocket like it was a weapon. Upstairs, Miles Arden called me into his office. It wasn't really his office. It used to be a supply closet. Now it had a desk, a lamp, and a small American flag placed just so, as if patriotism could be staged like a photograph. He gestured for me to sit. I didn't. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "You seem tired, Miss Carter." "I'm working," I said. "Everyone is working," he leaned back, "but not everyone is stable." My jaw tightened. "Are you calling me unstable?" "I'm suggesting that grief can create vulnerabilities." He paused. "Tell me about Tom Hale." My blood went cold. "How do you know his name?" Miles's smile was gentle. "We keep files. We track possible security issues. You were engaged to a serviceman who died at sea. That can complicate loyalty." I stepped forward. "I have never been disloyal to my country." "I didn't say you were," he said softly. "I said it could be complicated. A woman who hears voices. A woman who believes phone calls from the dead." My hands curled into fists. He watched them. "You understand, don't you? If you become a risk, we will have to remove you from sensitive work." "Remove me." "Not fire, remove." I swallowed. "What do you want from me?" Miles's eyes softened in a way that felt rehearsed. "I want you to do what you do best. Write, calm the public, encourage vigilance, keep morale high." Then he added, almost casually, "And tell me if you notice anything irregular." I realized then he wasn't accusing me. He was recruiting me. Or threatening me into being his informer. I left his office with my back straight, and my lungs full of air that tasted like metal. I needed someone I could trust. And in 1942, trust was rarer than silk. At lunch, I went to the only person in the building who didn't pretend everything was fine. Her name was Ruby James. Ruby was a sound technician, one of the few women allowed near the equipment, because the men had gone to war and someone had to keep the machines alive. She wore her hair in a scarf, hands always smudged with something, grease, graphite, ink. She had sharp eyes and a sharper mouth. People underestimated her because she was small and because she laughed easily. But Ruby heard everything. Not gossip. Signals. I found her in the sound room, splicing tape with a precision that looked like prayer. "Ruby," I said quietly. She didn't look up. "If you're here to tell me Leonard Crane's ego needs more room on the microphone, I'm going to charge rent." "I need your help," I said. That got her attention. She set down the razor blade. "What kind of help?" I leaned in, voice low. "Have you noticed anything strange on the lines?" Ruby's face changed, just slightly. Then she said, "Define strange." "I heard something on air that wasn't on the recording." Ruby stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once, slow. "You heard it too," I whispered. Ruby's eyes flicked to the door. "Not that, but yes, there's bleed sometimes, like someone writing our frequency." My mouth went dry. "Can you track it?" Ruby exhaled. "I can try." She opened a drawer and pulled out a notebook. In it were hand-drawn charts, times, frequencies, notes in tight script. "Every Tuesday and Friday," she said. My stomach clenched. "That's when the mail goes out." Ruby's eyebrows rose. "Mail." I told her what I'd seen. I told her about Miles. I told her about the phone call. When I finished, Ruby didn't laugh. She said, very quietly, "If this is real, Ev, you're standing in the middle of something that kills people." "I know," I said. And then I said the thing that scared me most. "I think Tom might be alive." Ruby's face softened for half a second. Pity, hope, or both. Then it hardened again. "Or someone wants you to think he is." That night, Ruby and I stayed late under the excuse of equipment checks. The building emptied. The hallways became long and echoing. The city outside pressed its face against the windows like it wanted to listen too. Ruby set up a monitoring rig, headphones, an auxiliary receiver, a tangle of wires that looked like nerves. We waited. At 9:03, static bloomed. Then the clicking came. Not random, patterned. Ruby mouthed, "Morse." My pulse hammered. The clicking resolved into a faint voice under the noise, like a whisper behind a curtain. A man speaking English but clipped, controlled. "Package confirmed, Friday waterfront, contact at station." Ruby's eyes widened. We weren't hearing ghosts. We were hearing messages. Miles Arden's vigilance segment wasn't just propaganda. It was cover. A normal broadcast masking something else, something piggybacking on our signal. Then, like a knife sliding into the room, the voice said, "Carter is responsive." I felt my blood drain. Ruby grabbed my wrist. Her grip was iron. "Do not move," she whispered. The voice continued, faint but clear enough. "Use hail. Repeat, use hail." My lungs wouldn't fill. They were using Tom's name, my Tom, to control me, to lure me, to make me obey. Ruby's face was pale. "They know you're listening." A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Ruby killed the receiver instantly, plunging the room into a sudden quiet so loud it hurt. We froze. The door handle turned. Slowly. Ruby slid a hand into a drawer and pulled out a heavy wrench like it was a pistol. The door opened. A silhouette. Then a voice, pleasant, familiar. "Ladies working late," Miles Arden said, stepping into the sound room as if he belonged there. How patriotic. My heart slammed. Miles's eyes moved over the equipment, the notebook, Ruby's hands. Then he looked at me. I warned you about irregularities, he said softly, and here you are. Ruby lifted the wrench slightly. Back up. Miles smiled as if she'd made a joke. Miss James, put that down. You don't want to do something you can't take back. He stepped closer. I'm going to ask you both to come with me, he said. This can be handled quietly. No one needs to get hurt. I heard in my mind the voice on the phone. They're using your station. I also heard something else. The ocean, the idea of it, the way it swallows. And then I realized, Miles Arden didn't want a quiet conversation. He wanted us away from microphones. Away from witnesses. Ruby's eyes flicked to the window, the fire escape. A second later, she shoved the table hard into Miles's path. Metal clanged. Run, she hissed. I didn't think, I moved. I yanked open the window, cold air knifing in, and climbed out onto the fire escape. Ruby followed, boots hitting the metal steps. Behind us, Miles shouted, not panicked, not angry, almost disappointed. Evelyn, he called, don't make this difficult. We scrambled down, hands freezing on the railing. Somewhere above, a door banged open. Footsteps. On the street, we ran into the blackout dark, our breaths white. We didn't go home. We went where desperate people go when they've run out of safe places. We went to Ruby's cousin's apartment in Harlem, a cramped place above a barber shop that smelled like hair tonic and frying onions. Her cousin, Samuel, opened the door with suspicion and then with alarm when he saw our faces. Samuel's role, his real role, was something Ruby hadn't told me until that moment. He worked at a shipyard by day. At night, he volunteered with a small civil defense group, neighborhood patrols, first aid, information sharing. People who didn't have uniforms but still did the work. He listened to Ruby's story without interrupting. When she finished, he said, if this man is who you think he is, you don't go to the police. Not first. Why? I asked, my voice thin. Samuel's eyes were tired. Because if he's inside the system, you don't know who he owns. He paced once, then stopped. You need someone federal who's clean, or you need proof so loud it can't be buried. Ruby said, we can get proof. We can record the signal. Samuel nodded. Then do it, and do it fast. Ruby looked at me. Ev, you're the one he's focused on. I swallowed hard. Because of Tom. Samuel's gaze sharpened. Who's Tom? I told him. And as I said it out loud, Coast Guard, dead at sea, voice on the phone, Samuel's expression changed. Not disbelief, recognition. He went to a drawer and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. It was old, creased soft. He placed it on the table. It was a short article about a rescue attempt off the coast. A boat lost, men missing, names listed. Thomas Hale's name was there. But next to it, small, almost hidden, was another line. Witness reports suggest one survivor may have reached debris field before nightfall. My throat tightened. A survivor. Samuel said, rumors, that's all. But shipyards get rumors like churches get prayers. Ruby leaned in. You think he could be alive? Samuel's face was careful. I think someone wants you to chase the idea. That doesn't mean the idea is false. It means it's useful. Useful. War turned people into tools. That's when the next hook sank its teeth into us. The phone rang. In Samuel's apartment. Ruby and I stared. Samuel didn't move. No one has this number except family. The phone rang again. I reached for it, hand shaking. Ruby grabbed my wrist. Don't. But Samuel nodded once. Answer on speaker. I swallowed and lifted the receiver. Hello. Static. Then the same voice, wind behind it, water in it. Ev, it said. My chest hurt. Tom, I whispered. A pause. Then, softer than before. I'm sorry. Not sorry he'd died. Sorry for something else. Listen to me, he said quickly. You need to come to the waterfront Friday night, Pier 18. There's a man there. He'll have my dog tags. He'll prove it. Ruby mouthed, trap. Samuel's eyes narrowed. I forced my voice steady. Why can't you come? A rough inhale. Because I can't, because they're watching, because if they see me, they'll... The line crackled violently, as if someone grabbed it. Then a different voice came through, calm, amused. Miles Arden. Evelyn, he said like we were old friends. Now we can stop pretending. My blood turned to ice. Miles continued, voice smooth as radio velvet. You want closure? I can give you closure. Friday night, Pier 18. Ruby reached for the receiver, but Samuel held up a hand, stop. Miles added very softly, bring the notebook. And then the line went dead. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Ruby said, he's inside the phone company too, or he's got someone there. Samuel said, Pier 18, he wants you isolated. Ruby looked at me, we don't go. But my heart, stupid, grieving, human, beat hard against my ribs. If there was even a chance Tom was alive. And if it was a trap, then it was a trap built out of my love. I said, we go but not how he expects. Samuel nodded once, we bring people. Ruby said, we bring a recorder. And I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was, we bring a story. Because I was a radio writer. If I couldn't fight with guns, I would fight with narrative. Friday came like a verdict. All day at the station, I moved like a ghost in my own life. Miles Arden was nowhere visible, no polite smile, no quiet supervision. But I felt him in every hallway, in every locked door, in every glance that lingered too long. At 6 p.m., Ruby met me 2 blocks away with a small portable recording device, bulky, hidden in a bag that looked like groceries. Samuel arrived with 2 men from his civil defense group, Leon and Frank. They were ordinary men with extraordinary seriousness in their eyes. Their roles were clear: watch, protect, witness. My role was bait. We took a cab toward the waterfront. The driver didn't ask questions. In wartime, people learned not to. The city near the piers was darker, lonelier. The smell of salt and rust and old fish clung to everything. Warehouses loomed like sleeping giants. Pier 18 was a long finger reaching into black water. And at the end of it, under a single weak lamp, a man waited. He was tall, coat collar up, hat low. He held something in his hand that glinted briefly. Ruby whispered, dog tags. My breath caught. We approached slowly, Samuel and the others hanging back in shadow. The man looked up. And for one violent second, my brain insisted it was Tom. The same build, the same stance, the same way of holding himself like he was always ready to dive into disaster. I stepped closer, whispering, Tom. The man's face became visible under the lamp. Not Tom. Older, harder, a scar across his cheek like someone had tried to erase him. He held out the tags, Evelyn Carter. I couldn't speak. He said, these belong to Thomas Hale. My hands trembled as I took them. They were cold metal, heavy with memory. I flipped them over. Tom's name. His serial. My vision blurred. The man leaned in and said almost kindly, I'm sorry, miss, he didn't make it. My knees threatened to fold. Then, from behind a stack of crates, Miles Arden's voice floated out, applauding, slow. Beautiful, he said, so human. Miles stepped into the light with two men behind him, not in uniforms, but they moved like they'd practiced hurting people. Miles smiled at me. "You brought friends, I expected that. You're braver than you look." Samuel stepped forward. "Who are you?" Miles's smile widened. "Someone who understands that wars are won with information. Your little station sends a signal that travels farther than you think. And Americans trust voices." Ruby hissed. "You've been transmitting to the enemy." Miles didn't deny it. "Enemy, ally, those are labels people use to sleep at night." Then he looked at me again. "Where's the notebook, Evelyn?" I swallowed, gripping Tom's tags so hard the edges bit my palm. "You used his name." Miles's eyes gleamed. "It worked." Rage rose in me, hot clean. "You killed him," I said. Miles tilted his head. "Did I, or did the ocean, or did your government sending him out with inadequate coverage? Everyone kills in war, Evelyn. Some of us just do it with less mess." Samuel's men shifted, ready. Miles lifted a hand. One of his men raised a gun. The world narrowed to a thin, terrifying line. This was the fear I'd been trying not to name. Not the war far away, but violence close enough to smell. Ruby whispered, "Ev." I heard, under everything, the water slapping the pier. Patient, hungry. And then I did the only thing I knew how to do. I spoke. Not pleading, not screaming. Projecting like an announcer. Like a voice meant to carry. "You like voices," I said loudly. Miles blinked, surprised. I reached into my bag and pulled out the portable recorder Ruby had given me. My hands shook, but my grip was firm. "This has your transmissions," I said. "It has your voice." Miles's smile faltered by a fraction. I continued louder, turning slightly so the sound carried down the pier where anyone, dock workers, patrols, might hear. "And it will go on air." Miles stepped forward fast. "No, it won't." Samuel moved between us. "Back up." Miles's man, with the gun aimed at Samuel. Time cracked open. One of those moments where you feel every heartbeat individually. Then Leon, one of Samuel's men, whistled sharply. From the darkness near the warehouse came another sound. A police whistle. Then another. Flashlights bobbed. Dock security, civil defense, people who had been warned to watch the waterfront because Ruby and Samuel had spread the word carefully, quietly, the way you spread fire without being seen. Miles's men hesitated. Miles's eyes narrowed. He hissed, "You think police will save you, half of them." But he didn't finish. Because the scarred man, the one who'd handed me Tom's tags, suddenly moved. He lunged at Miles like a man deciding, finally, to stop being a tool. They crashed together. The gunman swung his weapon toward the scuffle. A shot exploded. The sound punched the air. For a split second, I couldn't tell who had been hit. Then Miles staggered back, clutching his arm. Blood darkened his sleeve. The scarred man fell hard to the pier, face contorted, not from pain, but from effort, like he'd spent his last strength buying us 1 second. Samuel shouted, "Now." Ruby grabbed my elbow. We ran. Flashlights swept, shouts, boots pounding. Behind us, Miles Arden's voice rose, furious now, stripped of calm. "Evelyn." But the pier was no longer his stage. It was chaos, witnesses, light. We reached the street and didn't stop until our lungs burned. In the safety of Samuel's cousin's apartment, Ruby slammed the door and braced it, as if Miles could become smoke and slip under the frame. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely press the recorder's stop button. Samuel stared at the machine. "Is it enough?" Ruby took it gently, like it was a fragile animal. "If the tape is clean, yes. It's enough to force attention. I sat down hard, Tom's dog tag still in my palm. And then, because adrenaline leaves room for grief when it drains away, I started to cry. Not neat tears. Ugly ones. Ruby sat beside me, shoulder against mine. I'm sorry. I choked out, he's gone. Samuel said quietly, you didn't let them use him to take you. I looked up, but they did use him. Even now, I don't know what's true. Ruby's voice was steady. Here, what's true, you fought back. The next morning, we didn't go to my station. We went to a federal office Samuel trusted, one that handled communications security. We brought the recorder. We brought Ruby's notebook. We brought every detail. Men in suits listened. Their faces didn't change much, but their hands tightened around pens. When Miles Arden's voice crackled out of the tape, calmly discussing packages, contacts, and use hail, one of the officials swore under his breath. They took our statements. They kept us in a room for hours, not as prisoners, as evidence. Outside, the war kept moving. Inside, the small war in wires and voices had been dragged into the light. Weeks later, the station was raided. Quietly, efficiently, people disappeared from desks, files vanished, new locks appeared. Leonard Crane, the host, was questioned and released, pale and furious and confused. He never knew what he'd carried through his microphone. Miles Arden. I never saw him again. I heard rumors. Arrested, shot, escaped, dead, alive. Rumors are what the human mind does when it can't bear uncertainty. But here is what I know with certainty. After Pier 18, the phone stopped ringing with silence. After Pier 18, the clicking disappeared. After Pier 18, the station's signal felt cleaner, like a room after smoke has been cleared. And Tom Hale. His dog tags stayed with me. They were proof of nothing, except that he existed and was loved and was not just a name in a telegram. Sometimes at night, when the city was dim and the radio was low, I would still flinch at certain tones, certain pauses, the way a voice could lean into a syllable and make you feel personally addressed. Because that's the thing about radio, about storytelling, about war. A voice can be a weapon. A voice can be a hug. A voice can be a lie. A voice can be a lifeline. My name is Evelyn Carter. I was a radio copywriter. My role in the war was to write voices. But one voice wrote me back. And even though it was Tom, not really, not in the way my heart wanted, it changed me. It taught me that bravery isn't only running toward gunfire. Sometimes bravery is sitting in a chair, hearing something you're not supposed to hear, and deciding you will not be moved by fear. Sometimes bravery is telling the truth louder than the people who built the lie. And if you're listening to this, still breathing, still here, then the truth did what it always tries to do. It reached you.